John, I know you're not going to believe me, but I get really excited when people don't sell their houses. Have you ever heard a real estate agent say that, John?
No.
Good morning. This is Lance Kenmore with the Kenmore team, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's edition of the Tri-Cities Real Estate Update. As always, you can contact me, Lance Kenmore, anytime direct on my cell phone at 509-727-8977 or visit us on the web at kenmoreteam.com. Once again, I always like to thank John for hosting and everybody here at the station for working to make this happen. Mr. John McKay, how you doing?
Well, trying to recover or trying to dodge the heat.
You are? Okay.
Yes. We put a canopy over our heat pump.
Yes. That keeps it a few degrees cooler. It's running more efficient.
It's on the west back side of the house with no cover, and when you go look at the internal thermometer and it says what it is in the house, the external thermometer is actually the temperature in the unit.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so because there's a probe in there, and when it says it's 119 degrees, that's how hot your heat pump is.
You might have a problem. Okay.
So when it put the canopy over it, it's the ambient air temperature. It's like 101. So
you probably saved yourself a service call.
Yes, we did.
Which is really, really good. Yeah, we have been, our temporary AC units and property management have been coming and going and coming and going. It just, it gets to that point, but we have some amazing amazing HVAC companies that help out in our property management company, and they just go above and beyond. So all of our service providers out there, thank you so much for being out there and helping keep people cool for sure.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, mid next week, 90-92.
That sounds...
We're gonna break.
That sounds cool now.
Yeah. But we are gonna break.
I'll take it. I will be ready for that. I've gone into some vacant houses to show that did not have any AC on the last couple of weeks, and those showings go quick, which that's one of our little tips that we tell people, because people ask us, do we need to keep the AC or the heat on? Well, if you want to sell the house
reasonably,
we need them to be in there a certain amount of time in general, and so I tell people you gotta keep it somewhat cool, or the showings, people are gonna whip in there and then they're going to be out of there as fast as possible when it's, afternoon showing 105. So,
well, we set ours during this heat wave. We're at 74, 75 instead of 72. Even if you're at 76.
The unit, it feels good in there, and then you're not overworking the unit. So I like it, John. I like it a lot. Well, our crazy celebrity story of the week, we're going to be talking a little bit today about investing in real estate and some long-term wealth that can create. But do you know the actor Jeremy Renner?
Yeah. I've heard of him.
He's been in like the Bourne series. He's been, he's currently in that Mayor of Kingstown.
Yeah, he's the bow and arrow guy in Avengers.
Yes, that is exactly right. Well, he's also a house flipper. And so he had bought this house in 2008, and then he sold it a year later and made a $2.4 million profit on this house. So he had bought for 1.5, did some renovations, made a $2.4 million profit on it. Now, fast forward another 15 years, it's back on the market, this time for $6.5 million.
Wow.
So it's called the Ernest Hemingway House. It's reportedly that because he used it. How cool is this? He used it as his after-party crash pad.
Wow.
Back in the day. So the Ernest Hemingway House, back on the market, this time for $6.5 million. Now, what will that get you in Los Angeles? 4-bed, 5-bath, 5,800 square feet. It's like a Greek revival style. And with the updates that he did when he flipped it, it is a beautiful home for sure. But it's crazy to see how those numbers keep doubling, in approximately every 10 years that they've had in that situation. So we're going to get to a little bit more of that today and talk about a theory that I have that I'm working on in the current interest rate environment with investments. Second headline is we still have rates bouncing around 6.5% over the course of the last week. So they were up a little bit, down a little bit, but still in that 6.5% range, which we know just a few months ago we were over 7 and flirting with 7.5. So rates have been trending back down in a positive direction for us, and that's caused some activity out there in the market. So for today's topic, one of the things that always gets me excited about real estate, and that is seeing how people use it as a tool to grow their wealth.
Okay.
Now, I've got to tell you, there are certain times when I get really excited, and John, I know you're not going to believe me, but I get really excited when people don't sell their houses. Have you ever heard a real estate agent say that, John?
No.
Okay, but listen to what I'm talking about. So I'm talking about when people they buy specifically to get a property that they're going to keep long term and then turn into a rental.
An investment.
And so a lot of times when someone comes to me and says, hey, I'm ready to move to my next house, my family's growing, or I'm downsizing or making a different choice, but I want to keep my current house and rent it out, I get really, really excited in that situation because I know that those folks are making a financial decision that will likely change their future and their equity position that they have. So when we talk about equity, the basic thing that we talk about, that is the amount of money that your house is worth minus how much you owe on it. Okay. That's what equity is defined at. But what happens is when we look at home ownership, so there were some stats that came out. They were published in bankrate.com, and they said over 46% of mortgages, okay, are what are considered equity rich. So 46% of the mortgages of the homes that have a mortgage on them are considered equity rich. And that is when the outstanding balance on what you owe on the house is less than 50% of the home value. That's what's defined as equity rich.
So if you have a $200,000 house and you only own 90,
you're equity rich. In that property. Okay, and then when we get down and look even from a broader perspective, we look at in early 2024, there was a company called ICE's Mortgage Monitor. And earlier this year, they came out with some statistics that said the average mortgage holding homeowner holds $299,000 in equity. Okay, and then what happens for people is they can tap in and use that equity for things. Generally, you can borrow, let's just say with fees, roughly 65% of that equity if you needed to, for instance, do a major repair to a house or remodel a house to make it closer to what you want it to be. Or, as I'm going to talk about and propose in this show, is my topic for today is that I think there's a big argument for you might already own your next rental. Okay, and this is a really controversial topic. If you type this into Google and look at it, there's a lot of you'll see just as many articles that say don't convert your existing house to a rental as you say that you will. However, my take on this is probably a little bit different than most people. So if you look at the stats, so the last time that the best study that I could find on this that came from Bankrate said in 2021, so if we go back, and this is prior to the major run-up of equity, but the median net worth of U.S. households stood at $166,900. Not necessarily an overly impressive number, but that's when you're counting all assets. But their median net worth, if you take home equity out of it, it was only $57,900.
Ooh.
Okay, so we're talking almost $100,000 of additional equity, and this is median, right? So this is generally true. So if home equity is excluded, median wealth decreases by about 50% of more. And this is true over racial groups, ethnic groups. They've done massive studies on this. And so my takeaway from this, when I look at this situation, is that's such a massive number for a large number of the U.S. population.
Yeah.
That the basics of their equity, of their net worth, is coming from home ownership equity. So my takeaway has always been to this, and it was funny. We went camping last week, and there was a lot of, I'm getting older, so my nieces and nephews are getting older, which means now they're buying houses. And so, you sit around camp long enough, and they're asking you a lot of questions about what should I buy and when should I buy, which is really fun for me and super cool. But one of the things we talked about, and my takeaway from this has always been, do whatever you can do so that you have two houses. Okay, and here's my thought about this. I'm not a rocket scientist, and we have plenty of scientists in this area.
Yeah.
But I can look at those numbers and say, you're going to have a lot of your net worth tied up in your home equity. When you retire, you're also going to need a place to live. Okay, so if so much of your net worth is tied up in that home equity, you're not going to want to sell the current house you're in if you've paid it off by that point.
Yeah.
And so if you really want to tap into that equity without causing yourself to become homeless or have to move to a rental situation, you're going to want to own two houses.
Yeah.
Because then the fastest way that you can get to the equity of the second property is likely then to sell that house. But also, if you're doing just fine and you don't need a big chunk of money in retirement, you could also then potentially by that point have it paid off and then be generating monthly income to supplement, your retirement, your other sources, Social Security, if any's left. I'm not counting on it for me. Sorry, did I say that? This is not a political show. But yes, you want to have the ability to access that equity. And I think the best way possible is if that you can get to a position where you own two of those houses when it comes time to retire.
Yes.
My thought on that is these numbers are slightly dismal for great retirements, in my opinion. And if I could be a small part of doubling that number for people in the population, with, I don't want to say relatively little work, but with just a little bit of concentration, I think we would make a huge impact on people's retirement.
Yes.
So what's the fastest way to do that? What's the fastest way to own two houses? Well, or even if someone was struggling, the easiest way to do it. Well, a lot of times what I look at and I see people do is they buy a first-time home buyer house. They buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bath Rambler, which, by the way, folks, makes one of the best rental categories that we can have. They pay on that home and live in that home for 10 years. They get an equity position. They're usually then making more money in their job at that point. And then either the family expands or they want a bigger house or they're looking for a different location. They keep that first home as a rental and then purchase another primary residence. You're now paying on 2 mortgages. You've got one of them being covered from rental income. And fast forward, and it goes quick, fast forward another 15 to 20 years. At the end of that cycle, now instead of one, you've got 2 houses paid for. And you've increased your net worth by another 30%. Okay, I think this is a super, super powerful cycle that somebody with little to no experience in the real estate market can go into and drastically change their retirement and their net worth. There are a couple things you have to look out for, and you do. And why do I say that? Especially right now, I think you own your next rental property already. Most people are locked into a mortgage rate below 4%.
Yeah.
So I have an argument for you that says once you've been, let's say I use 10 years as the example. Your primary home, you paid for 10 years. Maybe you refinanced when rates were low. If you go out today in today's interest rate environment, and here's the issue that you've got. If you're getting a mortgage for an investment property, that mortgage rate is going to be more than if you're getting it for your primary property. There's more risk for investment properties for banks, so they charge higher rates to mitigate some of that risk. Most loans will allow someone that's been in a property for 10 years to, if they choose to keep that property and convert it to a rental, they can do that under the terms of that loan agreement. So step number one, you have to know what your lender's rules are in this situation. Can you now convert that property to a rental? So you've got to look and see if that's possible. If you can, you now have an investment property that has a mortgage rate on it of 4% or below.
Yeah.
No one else can go get that in this current market without a huge buy down. So you have a big advantage there. The other part of that makes that highly advantageous is that with rents where they are now, you likely can cover that mortgage and cover property management fees because of the rates that you were at with that mortgage. So now we're talking a hands-off type of investment that you can put into a property management portfolio. You can have professionally managed, cover those fees, and cover your mortgage, and that's happening relatively automatic. The argument and the flip side that people don't like of this conversation is that now they're going to go out and get a primary residence and pay the current rates at, which we just talked about at the top of the show, 6.5% or a little bit below. But when you go to get a primary, you're going to be getting a primary residence loan for that. You're going to be saving the delta on what you would have if you had gotten an investment property for that situation. So you're keeping one that's 4% or under. You're getting your next one at 6.5%, or if you do a buy down in that situation, you can get it below 6. And now you've put yourself in a really, really good interest rate position, keeping your current house and turning it into a rental. The second biggest thing, and here's what I mean, there'll be a million YouTube videos on this, but I'm not a CPA, nor can I give CPA advice on this because it oversteps and violates my licensing as a real estate agent. But in this situation, what we're talking about, converting a primary residence into a rental, you need to speak with a CPA about the tax implications because the taxes change dramatically for rentals versus owner-occupied. They're going to have you factor into capital gains will likely be part of that discussion, your primary residence exemption, what that looks like. So there's a lot of things that can happen in that situation, good or bad, that your CPA can advise you on. So before you made a decision like that, I implore everybody to talk to their CPA about what that looks like. The second thing that we're telling people when they convert from primary residence to a rental, when they buy another primary, usually their insurance agent a good insurance agent will point this out that knows somebody. But a lot of people use insurance online, which does not necessarily know your computer screen very well. And the big mistake they can make is not converting their primary residence insurance policy to a landlord policy. Huge, huge mistake if there is a problem. Because if you were just doing this normally, you very easily could type into a screen with a second company, get another primary residence insurance, forget to change yours. Now it's a rental. Something happens in that rental. Guess what type of insurance policy you had?
You have the wrong one.
You had an owner-occupied policy. And when the adjuster comes out and sees that the car that drove through the house was from a renter that was renting the house from you, and the adjuster says, do you have renters in this property? Oh, well, guess what? That does not covered by an owner-occupied policy, and you got a big problem. And that, I mean, there's 100 scenarios there. So the next biggest thing, and a lot of times this happens when you go to professional property management, is we're asking for copies of that. We're talking to people about what that means, but it could get missed if you were just doing this on your own. So make sure you've switched your insurance policies in that situation. Third thing we talk about is, what are the rental rates? We're talking about that, and especially in today's topic about utilizing a primary that's being converted, you're likely looking at a lower interest rate, which lowers your payments. But what can you bring in from a rental side of the equation? What does that look like? What are the market rents? What's the pressure on those rents? What would rent it quickly so I don't have a long-term vacancy rate? Those are all very, very important questions that you want to be asking. Fourth thing on the list is, most cities and counties in these situations will have permits and licenses that you need to have for a rental. You, especially like City of Pasco, I was dealing with them yesterday on a rental license application, on an inspection for a rental. There are rules that the cities have that govern rentals. You can't just toss up an ad out there, not get any additional licenses or permits, and then be operating a rental. It will not go the way you want it to go if you miss those steps in those situations. And then the last thing that I wrote down is property management for you in this situation? If we're just talking about a situation where you have one more rental, you might want to educate yourself on that, do some of it yourself. But look into your options. And if you're converting a mortgage that had a low interest rate, you might have some additional room in there. You might be able to take the headaches and the hassles of this and turn it over to a property management company in that situation. And then the last point of this, and there's a lot of people that don't agree with this situation, because at the top of the show, I said to you, one of the benefits of having a lot of home equity is that later in your life, you can make larger down payments, or you can have reduced payment amounts. Meaning, if you sell your current house instead of renting it, like we've been talking about on the show, you can put a larger chunk of that equity down on your next house. So my argument for this in this situation is, if that was true, why do the numbers suck so bad for when we look at the medians and we look at net worth and we look at where we're at in those situations? And my argument for that is that there was a lot of refinancing to those lower mortgage rates and those lower interest rates. And then that created some, shall we say, spending leakage. Meaning that when you have a lower housing bill like that, a lot of people have a tendency to spend more on other items that won't end up in the net worth category for homeowners. And so my argument for that is that having the second home like that in that situation, or buying a primary residence now at a 5.99 or 6% interest rate, will help you act like forced savings account when you have another investment property that is continued to get paid down. So I'm using some human nature tactics there to explain why I might present that to somebody in that situation. And so I think there's a big argument for it. And I always do these shows based upon the reality of it. And the reality of what we're seeing in our property management company right now is that there is a lot more landlords coming to us with this exact situation for that reason. They have a perfect investment property right now with a low rate that they plan on keeping for the life of that loan to pay down, pay off, and have contribute to the bottom line of their net worth. And so I tell kids, this show is based upon sitting around the campfire with young kids in their 20s.
Yeah.
And what am I telling them in that situation? I'm telling them to buy more, buy fast in that situation so that we can get them into that first one, get it converted within a couple years to a second one, and then set it and forget it in that situation. And then hopefully at the end of that situation, we've increased that next generation's net worth by another 30 to 35%. So McKay, I took a little trip, and I sit around the campfire and I still can't stay away from real estate in that situation.
Yeah.
And so I was taking notes on this as we were having that chat. Well, folks, enjoy the heat this weekend if that is your thing, and then don't worry, it's getting a little cooler. The market is not, however. We're extremely busy and looking forward to seeing you back here next weekend.
Right here on News Talk 87.